Hey, JM here. This one is about an animation rendered with Eevee, and it contains hard surface meshes created with JMesh Tools and volumetric lights. Let's first have a look at the animation and then come to a short breakdown so that you can see how to do it. Okay, that's it. Now let's have a look at the project. Here I have the hard surface model that I created in the previous video. And for this I added a mirror for the x-axis, I activate it now, and also an array modifier. And with this you can create this kind of hallway, and I do the same for the floor. The floor is also modeled by using my hard surface add-on JMesh Tools, which is free by the way. Again, I added a mirror and an array modifier. And that's the basic setup for the scene. Now let me show you the lights, which is also pretty simple. I have a sunlight which is pointing to the floor. Let me go to the lights tab, and you see it has a kind of yellow color, and the strength are set to 3.5, and I also enabled the shadows. Okay, then there are 2 point lights which have a bluish tone, and the power is set to 1000. Okay, that's it for the lights, and when I go now to the rendered viewport shading, you see there is another light source, and this is an HDRI. You can set this here in the world properties, and it is added to the color slot. For the slot you select an environment texture, and for this you can open the HDRI image, which I downloaded by the way from HDRI Haven. Okay, that's it for the lighting. Now let's have a look at the render properties. The engine are set to Eevee, and I enabled ambient occlusion with the default settings, then the bloom effect for the nice glow. And what you can enable as well is the screen space reflection. I haven't enabled it for the render, but you can try. Okay, these are the effects I used, and before I come to the volumetric lights, let me show you how I set up the volume for the volumetrics. Alright, let's see, I just added a cube that covers all the objects and the lights that we added, and you see this is a nice effect, but I didn't want to overdo it, so you have to be careful when setting the values of the material. The shader for the box is a principled volume shader. You find this here on the material tab, but instead of connecting it to the surface, as you would for a principled BSDF, you have to connect it to the volume. The shader for the surface has to be removed. Now you can play with the values, the colors, and the density for instance, but you have to be careful that it is not too extreme regarding the density or emission. Play around with it, it's a nice effect, but also increases render time. But in order to see this nice volumetric glowing, you have to go to the render tab and enable the volumetric lights. I stick to the default values, but I set the tile size to 2 pixels. Okay, that's all for setting up the scene. Now let's have a look at the camera and how to animate this. Here you can see the camera moving around and rotating, and in the timeline there are the keyframes to store these rotations and locations. And when I create this, I like to open a new window, also with the 3D viewport. Again, go to render preview, and with the camera selected, I press the 0 key on the numpad. And now I have a view through my camera on the right side, and I can move and rotate it on the left side and set the keyframes, either by pressing the I key, or I just enable the automatic keyframe insertion, and each time I rotate or move the camera, a keyframe is added to the timeline at the location of the playhead. For this automatic insertion, just enable auto keying by pressing this button. Okay, now we see the camera is animated, but when you watch the rendered movie carefully, you saw that the objects in the scene are animated as well. But how can this be done? Well, we have to apply the mirror and the array modifiers. I saved the project under a new file name, and for the objects, like here the floor, I applied the array and the mirror modifier. The same I did for these ones. And now we have separated objects and meshes that we can animate. So let's see, first I press 0 on the numpad so that we get a view through the camera, and go to a frame where we have an animation, like this one. I separated this part of the mesh to an object that I can move, rotate and, yeah, of course, animate. Like you do for any other object, you can rotate or move it around and then set keyframes, and that's what I did. The same for this object, you just have to find the good point in time when the object is visible through the camera. Okay, last but not least, render the movie. We go to the render tab. You can set the resolution. I set it to 1080. The frame rate I set to 24, you can increase it if you like. Then of course you have to define the output directory to which it is rendered. And I set the file format to FFmpeg and the encoding to MPEG-4. The video codec is H.264, and with this you render a movie, which is okay for 600 frames, but if you want to be on the safe side, you can also render images and then later on combine them to a movie, for instance by using the Blender sequencer. Anyway, I rendered the movie. One image takes about, let's see, 5 seconds. So the whole movie will be rendered in about 50 minutes. To render the movie, you go to Render, Animation, or use the shortcut Ctrl F12. Okay guys, this tutorial was a bit different. It was more a kind of breakdown on how I created the scene and the movie. Tell me if you like it, and if you have any questions, add these to the comments below. And also follow me on my Instagram, where I upload renders from time to time. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you on JNM.